Hey everyone, welcome back to the Overseers. This is a podcast about the Overwatch League. I'm Proilios and I'm joined once again by my co host Nightwing.
Hey, what's up?
So, today we'll be doing a comprehensive review of the Dallas Fuels roster for 2021. And in the previous episode, we did the same for the Atlanta Reign. So, if you guys haven't checked that out already, I'll be putting a card up on the screen right about now so you can check out that video whenever you can. So, we'll be going over the different players as well as the coaching staff that's part of Dallas. So we'll be starting off with the tanks, going on to the DPS, the supports, and then the coaching staff, and then any conclusive statements or further questions that we have. Nightwing, you ready? Let's start off.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so we'll get into it first with the tanks, which is Fearless and Hanbin. So Fearless is the main tank, Hanbin's the off tank, and like at least compared to I think the Atlanta Reigns tank line, this is a much more flexible one. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, they're both coming from rosters that performed extremely well last season. Fearless comes from Shanghai and Hanbin coming from the dismantled Paris Eternal roster. And they really were standout players in both of these things, both of these teams. If you looked at Fearless, whenever he would step into the Shanghai team last year, he would really just change the landscape of the game. Like you can, like if you remember the Summer Showdown,
Mm-hmm.
um, Fearless is the one that was really a difference maker in that one, and also the May Melee.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, when they were stuck with Stand One, Shanghai was not able to get much done. So Fearless is a really standout main tank from his previous results, and Hanbin has been a contender for one of the best off tanks in the league last year as well.
For sure, for sure. I think and like such a great storyline even for Fearless, right? Because he was with the Shanghai Dragons in season one, where they had that horrible 0-40 season, and then after that he went back to contenders, just grinded a lot with Team CC, became like a really strong contender as a main tank once again. Joined back the Overwatch League in season 3 and absolutely dominated, right? So this guy had probably one of the best Winstons we have ever seen in the league. And I think even when he busted out the other main tanks, like he played a pretty good Reinhardt for the few matches that we saw it. His Orisa and Ball were also pretty decent, I would say. So I think he's just like one of the few god level main tanks we have in the league right now, and the same goes for Hanbin because this guy excels on every single off tank he plays. Like his Sigma was just one of the best last year. His Diva is excellent. His Zarya, like he's one of the I think there are not many off tank players whom you would actually say plays a really good Zarya, but Hanbin is like a very like quite incredible on the hero, and probably that's why coaches Rush and Yong used to always run Hanbin on Zarya whenever they played Kings Row, no matter what meta it was. Uh, but yeah, I think this is a fantastic tank line. And my question to you, Nightwing, is this the best tank duo in the Overwatch League for season 4?
Coming into the uh, fourth season of the Overwatch League, I was definitely thinking that it might have been Dallas's best lineup. But after looking at the Nexus Cup hosted by Next, um, that was held recently,
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of developing a few doubts. Though it might not be entirely the tank line's fault, but like some misplays and some very clear weaknesses from the fuel, I think were made apparent
Mm-hmm.
in that tournament.
Right. Yeah, I think probably part of the fuel sort of failure in the Nexus Cup was because of the meta at play, but I still think they've got a really like elite tank line. I don't think there's a lot of tank duos that can directly compete with the skill level these two guys possess. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them play. And like they still have a couple of months for the league to begin. I can't wait to see the sort of synergy they develop and show off when the matches actually begin, right? So have you got any more points to add for the tanks? So otherwise
Yeah.
we'll yeah go on.
Um, when I was watching Fearless during the Cup, especially during his match against Shanghai, if you looked at Volskaya, for example, where they were on a ball-to-ball head-to-head match. There was just not enough space being created through Fearless, and because of that, the other team was easily able to capture the entire space. They were able to take that high ground on first point,
Yeah,
the middle one, and they also had the easy point control,
yeah,
and the backline was also um, very safe because of the way that Void and Fate had set up the position.
yeah.
Whereas Fearless was just kind of vibing a bit to the side of the point, which was quite weird and weirdly disappointing because I have seen some extremely good gameplay from him over the course of the last season.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that Dallas is probably just not taking that tournament very seriously because otherwise, um, it would be quite strange that Fearless's level has dropped down to this level.
Mm-hmm.
As for Hanbin, I think Hanbin still had a decent performance. While I think not quite up to, for example, Void and Krong, whom they played against and got 3-0'd both times. I think Hanbin was still one of the stronger suits of the team during the match,
Mm-hmm.
uh, during both of the matches actually. I think that his mechanical ability is great and his way of thinking is great, and that's something I think the team can rally around. Fearless, I hope, I sincerely hope they were just messing around and something better can be done. Obviously, some of the blame can lie with the coaches as well because the comps were not quite set in the place, and they weren't playing very close to the meta in that tournament, like you
Yeah,
said.
yeah.
They weren't. There was not a lot of echo play, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that's something they can ratify.
For sure, for sure. And like, it's good that you mentioned the Nexus Cup actually, because even I watched a few of the games, and Dallas, it puzzled me a little bit as well that despite having a ton of talent, we'll get to the details shortly, but despite having so much talent, they weren't as quite as clean as I expected them to be. Um, but like they were playing against the Shanghai Dragons first of all, which was a really good team, and Guangzhou has made some pretty strong additions as well. So um, I'm not going to put too much weight into the Nexus Cup. Um, but yeah, it was definitely a good reference point to understand where the fuel might be at the beginning of the 2021 season. Um, So, all right, moving off of that, let's talk about the DPS line, man. And I think this is a completely cracked lineup, right? Because they've got Xzi, they've got Sparkle, and they've got Doha. It's, I mean, this is just a really talented DPS line, right? Because all three of these players were really good in their own way in season three. You had Doha, who was still with the fuel at that time. He played a really great Genji. His Mei was pretty good. His Doomfist is like beyond amazing. He played a decent Echo as well. I really feel like he's a dark horse when it comes to top tier flex DPS players. I think because the Dallas Fuel sort of imploded once again in season three, he didn't look as great because he didn't get that kind of support from his teammates. But I still think he's right up there, man. I think he can contend with some of the best flex DPS. And what do you think about that?
I think that the DPS line for Dallas is quite good. I have a lot of respect for these players. And in terms of Doha, I think that in season three, in the beginning, he was being treated as a very low resource player because Decay was the one that you really wanted to pocket in the beginning and really put all the resources into, and Decay delivered. And
Mm,
that's basically how you got the kind of Decay carries that you saw while Decay was still on that team. But I think once DK moved on from the team, you saw Doha really see a spotlight on himself. Once he got some more resources to work with, he was
yeah,
the one that was popping off much more than Oni got.
yeah, for sure.
And alongside that, even before that, there has been some stellar performances with Doha and Sparkle. in contenders before that,
Mm-hmm.
where they were playing the Sombra Doom meta. I think that um, Doha is really underrated, honestly,
Yep.
and I think he can do some great things this season as well.
Mm-hmm.
As long as more resources are pumped into him as well, and he's not sidelined to be backup for another high resource player.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of Sparkle, I think Sparkle also performed exceptionally well last season, though it was limited onto a few heroes. Honestly, his best performances were probably just on his Genji.
Yep.
And while his Doom and his Mei, for example, have been touted as being good, they weren't all that impressive
Mm-hmm.
to me in season three. I think that's something that he may be working on, especially since I even saw him play Mei this during this cup.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but and Xzi as a hit scan player, I really look up to Xzi. I have spent hours looking through the replay viewer, looking at Xzi's gameplay and how he tries to position and peak angles
Mm-hmm.
with Widow and McCree. I think Xzi's Tracer is not probably at the highest level, but even then, it is extremely serviceable and they can do good things with this DPS line. That being said, I found it a bit. Uh, I found the echo play from the Dallas Fuel a bit lacking during the cup. I think
Mm-hmm.
it was just not up to the par of the kind of play that you were seeing from other echo players like Fleta
Right.
and Eileen. I think that that's something that they need to work on, especially if there's such a busted hero in that patch. Like if you don't have a grasp on that situation, then you're kind of lost.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah. True.
Yeah, that's basically
And
what happens.
is so since I touched on what I thought of Doha, but let me just quickly go over Sparkle and Xi as well, because Doha and Sparkle are both flex DPS players, right? Essentially, but looking at Sparkle's sort of signature heroes, I would say based off of what we saw in season three, he could be a sort of Genji Doom specialist for the fuel, and they could let Doha handle the rest of the flex DPS roles like Mei and Echo, um, Hanzo even maybe. But yeah, Sparkle is just like a god on at least these two heroes. Even though we didn't see a lot of his Doom, or rather we didn't see top tier Doomfist gameplay from him in season three, I still think he's a really strong flex DPS, and he was one of the players who was worth the hype, right? Because before season three began, there was a ton of a lot of people were anticipating Sparkle to join the league and pop off with the Paris Eternal, and he did that in I think the Summer Showdown as well as the Countdown Cup, I believe, where the meta was double shield Ash Genji, and he just sort of carried his team. Like even though he had a pretty strong team, he still put up carry performances and really showed off the amount of mechanical skill that he possesses. So I really could see him being a specialist for Genji and Doomfist here. And as for Xi, yeah, we know how deadly his McCree is. We know how deadly his Widow is. It's just like a top tier hit scan DPS as well. I think Dallas has done a really good job of accumulating all of these, the tank as well as DPS players, who are probably some of the best in their respective categories. Uh, and I really look forward to seeing what this team can do, provided they sort of overcome the lack of an actual tracer player. Uh, which actually leads me to ask you, Nightwing, how do you think these guys can um, cover up the sort of shortcomings in terms of tracer play? Do you think they can develop XZ, or do you think they need to sign someone else?
Well, I mean, signing someone is definitely an option. Dallas is an org with ungodly amounts of budget,
Mm-hmm.
but the fact also remains that you could probably save that spot for players in other categories. Um, I think since they have two flex DPS, I guess signing one tracer player to work alongside XZ um, might be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Apart from that, XZ and Sparkle often. swap the role of tracer player between each other. As you even saw in the cup, I think both of them have decent tracers, but there's nothing to write home about. And uh, I don't know, they either need to develop it a lot harder or they need to sign someone. I'm not sure who they have in the market to be able to sign them, but also there there's probably tons that they could find because Tracer is a hero that is played like very highly in GM. So
Yeah.
GM and the highest ranks, and who knows, maybe they'll find someone off rank. Uh, even though
Chipsa?
even though Chipsa, yeah, he's my favorite Tracer player. He'll definitely work out. But players like Arns and Jorak have been found with relatively little experience, so I think they might be able to find someone. Though it might just not be worth the effort. They're already having, I think, even though this team has played together as Element Mystic before, they are not really synergized from what I'm seeing with their current performances. Um, that's something they should work on during uh, the off season so that they can go into the season strong. And I'm not sure if adding a new piece would help with that.
I do have to mention though that I think just yesterday the tracer damage fall of nerfs went live. So if that's the like if Blizzard's going to continue toning down power creep like that, I think Tracer's not going to be buffed again anytime soon, and that could sort of help the Fuel get away with not having a Tracer player, and they could play maybe Doha's Sombra instead, if the meta allows for it. But I guess we'll just have to see, right? Because we don't know what the meta is going to be on this new patch with Echo, Tracer, and who else was nerfed? There's one more set of nerfs.
And
Yes, Zen. Yeah, they just slaughtered Zen, but yeah, we'll have to wait and watch. Quite simply. Um, so do you have any more points to add for the DPS?
in terms of like, I don't think you can really look at patch notes as a point of relief this before the season. I think the balance team can always change their minds and buff or nerf anyone randomly, honestly.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think as a coach, as a team owner, you have to create a roster that is flexible in its entirety. And Tracer is a hero that has never not been played like for an extended period of time, apart from maybe goats. And the format of the game has been changed so that goats won't ever happen again. So I think Tracer will find a way to weasel herself back in,
All right.
especially since it is a hero that is designed for top players. I think it's high risk, high reward. That's what the 150 HP is for.
Yeah.
And uh, and I think that they will find themselves struggling against top Tracer players because dive, like it or not, is something that is a playstyle that exists, and Tracer is one of the best heroes to play on DPS for the dive playstyle. Genji has a lot of weaknesses. Echo has locked movement to some extent, so I think they will need a Tracer uh, player to either emerge from their existing roster or they have to find someone. Apart from that, I think there's nothing else to talk about the DPS.
All right. Cool. So let's move on to the supports. And Dallas has currently got Jecse as the only main support, and they've got Fielder and Rapel on flex support. So let me just start off talking about Jecse because if you remember, he joined the league back in 2019 first, and back then he was really hyped for being an in-game leader and shot caller. But I think after he came into the league, I wasn't as impressed with him, probably because of all the hype that was built around him. He played for the Seoul Dynasty early on, and then there was this sort of rotation that he had with Toby, which didn't really work out. After that, he joined the Outlaws in 2020, and that team also didn't do very well. So I'm overall not sure where he stands, but I'm overall not impressed with both his track record and just sort of the gameplay that he's showing us. I don't know how much of that is because of the teams he's put on and how much of that is because of his own skills. But overall, I think he's probably like an average or below average main support considering the talent we have in the league this year. But yeah, I'll let you share your points before we move on to the flex supports.
I think Jecse is kind of cursed to be stuck in this never-ending hell of historically disappointing teams from Seoul to Houston to Dallas. I think Jecse has had a rough spot in deciding which team to go to.
Mm-hmm.
I think his play has not looked very promising. Um, like not top tier, but he has never looked bad.
Yeah.
I think in terms of main support, there is no particular weakness in main support that he has,
Mm-hmm.
so he can be adapted to many different situations. Um, that being said, in a head-to-head against someone like Mandu in this cup that I was watching, Nexus Cup,
Mm-hmm.
um, he was just not able to deny value from the enemy DPS or peel for his own flex support as well.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that is a result of the entire team, but also when you're playing Lucio, you do dictate the tempo of the game to some extent because
True.
you're the one that decides when to speed boost in or out. Um, so I think that um, Jexa's role, especially as a shot caller, is probably requiring some more work
Yep.
because a lot of the decision making of the team comes down to Jexa, and it hasn't looked that great so far.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think of their flex support situation with Fielder and Rappel?
Well, I would think something of their flex support situation, except that they did not show me Fielder.
Yeah.
The poor guy has still only been viewed through the lens of hyping,
Mm-hmm.
and even in the cup, as far as I remember, they did not field him once. And
His name's Fielder and they didn't field him. Yikes.
yeah, he's just gone into a secluded field and I don't know, gone to sleep. I
Puns are horrible.
think I would really love to see some more gameplay from him because I think he showed us some really promising stuff when he was on the Paris Eternal last year.
Mm-hmm.
And as for Rapel, I have not really been very impressed with Rapel, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, I agree.
I have never had high expectations from Rapel, despite his work with Element Mystic in the past. Um, but I do think that, um, to be fair to Rapel, he was also on the Houston Outlaws,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a team that is perennially disappointing. So maybe he can make something work in this new roster,
Mm-hmm.
especially with some familiar faces.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I tend to agree with Rappel. At least I think he put up average performances on the Outlaws last year. I mean, his BAP was okay, his Zen was not bad, but again, he like the flex support market has always been stacked in the Overwatch League, right? And if you're to be considered above average or exceptional, you need to do something really phenomenal. And Rappel hasn't shown us that yet. And I think Fielder was a bit of a brighter spark relatively last year because despite all the hyping, like you said, he was good with Paris. Once again, the flex support market is stacked. I'm not sure if he can be top tier, but I feel like he will be competitive enough to at least contest some of the other, better flex supports in the league. Um, if not be top tier himself, but we'll have to just wait and watch. And what did you like? Jecse and Rapel, right? They are here from the Houston Outlaws, and I don't think this is talked about or asked enough. But do you think they were part of the reason Houston was bad in 2020?
I mean, if you're a part of the team, you're part of the reason why a team is bad.
Mm-hmm.
You can't remove responsibility from yourself just because someone had maybe a bigger role.
Mm-hmm.
I think eventually it is the job of the entire team to work cohesively, and it's never the fault of any one singular person. You have to all make it work with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think Jexa didn't even look that promising like in Soul Dynasty.
Yeah.
So it's not like he's some superstar that was being oppressed by um, Houston, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and Rapel has not been exceptional either. I think it's just that some players need good coaching to be able to shine better. If you look at Fearless, he was very disappointing on Shanghai, but with the right coaching, with Coach Moon on Shanghai last year, he has done extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
And and I feel like it might be the same lack of coaching that
Mm-hmm.
might um, be showing his performance degrading this year so far.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same can be said about the supports. There is no difference really.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. And let's finally touch upon the coaching stuff, which is Rush as the head coach, and then they've got Yong and Aid as assistant coaches. And this is once again, as a lot of people have touched on multiple times, the Dallas Fuel are essentially just old Element Mystic players, with the exception of Fielder, whom Rush and Yong probably got from Paris because they felt he was coachable and serviceable. Um, but overall, this is sort of like a conglomerate of familiar faces for all of them, and it on the face of it, it should be easier for Rush and Yong to coach these players because they've had so much experience with them on Element Mystic. And all of these players have done remarkably well when they were in Tier 2 with these coaches. So, do you think Rush and Yong and Aid will be able to propel these guys to be a top tier team this year?
I think while familiarity is definitely something that um, will make it easier to communicate with the players, I think the double-edged sword of familiarity is also that you might kind of stop taking your coach seriously. If you look at some of these players, a lot of them are quite hyped up, and it would not be surprising if they kind of think highly of themselves as well,
Mm-hmm.
which makes them a bit immune to any sort of criticism or coaching, which might be beneficial, especially when they're building this new team and they need to figure out new types of synergy that works for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at someone like Sparkle, or if you look at someone like Xzi, I think that the kind of superstar star status that has been given to these players might be quite detrimental in their learning and their adaptability,
Mm-hmm.
because eventually um, you think they would just go back to their comfort picks when they get serious or when they get backed into a corner. If you look at how the match against the Dragons went, as well as the match against Guangzhou, Xi would just swap to McCree whenever
Yeah.
the team wasn't doing well and try to frag out.
Mm-hmm.
It obviously did not work too well because the team still lost 3-0 both times, but you can see that that's kind of the mentality that's being bred into these players, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what the coaches will have some issue with.
Right.
Um, I think Yong was having a hard time keeping Dallas together last year at the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but maybe Rush is able to provide some stability. I would certainly like to see that because these are superstar players, and I have a lot of respect for a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
But so far, it's not looking too promising. And with the kind of cycle of misery that Dallas goes through each year, um, that does seem like it's likely, but maybe they'll be able to break out of the cycle this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just I've been really high on Rush recently because of his performances with both the Paris Eternal as well as his sort of long duration with Element Mystic. So he's clearly good at developing players and getting them to synergize with each other. Um, I think so far, I'm not sure what exactly the situation was in the Nexus Cup, whether these players were actually uh, they hadn't uh, they weren't taking it too seriously, or they were just trying out some experimental compositions, or if they were like plain old sandbagging, but I'm not sure about what was going on there. But knowing how good Rush has been in the past, and now that he's back with Yong, and also got Aid, whom he worked well with the Eternal, uh, I think these guys can do a pretty good job at getting this team together once again. And I feel like since they have 2 months remaining for the season to start, they can learn quite easily from the mistakes they made in the Nexus Cup and sort of propel themselves forward to be a championship roster. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a nice thought that they'll be able to turn themselves into a championship roster, and maybe that is what will happen. I I do have some degree of faith in Rush with the kind of results that he's shown. Um, and and I hope that the team does put together a competitive performance. Um, I don't think they're quite at the bottom yet, uh, but and they do still have very redeemable qualities, and each of their players is extremely talented as an individual. I think they just have to find the kind of teamwork and synergy, calm style, short call style that really works with this roster, and then they'll be able to do quite good. Because in terms of mechanical ability, in terms of individual ability, there is no doubt that these players are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something to be said about the teamwork, which I think they will be able to work on.
Mm. I think it's like it's about time for the Dallas Fuel as well as their fans to be a really competitive roster, because the past 3 years they have been quite disappointing. Like the memes are completely true. Dallas Fuel fans just keep on getting disappointed after every showing the team has probably, and as you saw at least in the past 2 years, right? In like 2018, we know it all fell apart right from the very beginning. Even in 2019, they were pretty weak. I think initially, like people always say that hey, they got some wins during goats, right? But they had a very easy strength of schedule back then, and after that, they just kept getting weaker and weaker until I don't think they got a single win in stage 4, if I remember correctly, when 2-2 was introduced. And even in 2020, they were pretty underwhelming despite how strong the roster seemed to be in the preseason. And then there were internal conflicts. Decay left the team, it imploded, and it all went to hell. Um, so I think it's a really high stakes year for the Fuel this year, because they really seem to have invested well and taken a lot of effort to get this whole roster together. Uh, so I think they need to work really hard and put up a great showing for it to be worth the effort. So I'll let you chime in on that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I agree that the past seasons have been kind of a failure. And if you look at 2020, the Decay was there to kind of carry the team kicking and screaming to victory, or at
Mm-hmm.
least a decent score line.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think this year the players are roughly equal or equivalent in their skill level. There is no one that is a standout player that is head and shoulders above the rest. I think if they still have issues with this kind of team, then it's got to be a holistic approach that they need to take to really figuring their issues out.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Rush and Yong might be able to achieve that this year.
Mm-hmm. It's like if this year also fails, I think the Dallas management has really screwed something up, right? Because if you are not able to be competitive with such a talented roster, you're doing something wrong right at the very top and not helping the players out in the right way, or giving them the facilities that they actually require to be that top tier team that you've invested so heavily in. Um, so I would I think their goal this season, uh, before knowing who was on this roster, I would have expected them to just try and put together a stable and competitive roster, sort of just put out the dumpster fire that they've created in these past 3 years. And instead, based on what I'm seeing, it's a really it could possibly be a championship worthy roster based on how well the coaching staff and the players spend their time developing their synergy and their strategies in the remaining 2 months leading up to the season.
I
So,
think one
yeah.
strength that Dallas has this year is that they're running a completely Korean roster.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dallas, as a whole, NV as a whole, has always had this um, Western savior kind of mindset. They've had this kind of bad boy attitude almost,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that kind of team culture, I think, was not gelling well with the kind of Korean aesthetic, the kind of Korean culture that Korean players are bringing. I think this year they have a lot more aligned mindset in terms of familiarity with each other, culture, past history. I think that is something that will make Dallas comfortable in their own skin as a team,
Mm-hmm.
um, especially during a time where players' mental health is failing due to the pandemic and other global events taking place.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Dallas might be able to keep it together and just win by default by not breaking. Unbreakable mental.
Yep, yep. That's one way to go about it. And all right, so any finishing thoughts that you have? Because I think we've covered pretty much all the main points in this, um, in sort of the meat of this episode. Any
I
finishing
think
thoughts? Yeah.
um, I think Dallas could probably use another main tank. Honestly, I think Fearless is great. He has performed well last season, but the kind of weakness I'm seeing, it might be worth, especially because they only have about what 8 players right now. They
Mm-hmm.
have a few spots that they can fill in, um, especially because it's not like Dallas has huge financial constraints even when they're signing the superstars.
Mm-hmm.
And I think someone that rotates in and out with Fearless so that Fearless can refine his own set of main tanks, and maybe the other tank can refine his own set of main tanks and his own play style.
True.
Because no main tank is going to have the same play style for the same hero, even if some things are ideal to do as a particular hero. I think that different playstyles will help Dallas change up their looks when they are being countered by a team. If
Mm-hmm.
they keep continuing with the same exact playstyle, I think it's hard to throw off the enemy team, um, and that's something they could really change with a new main tank who is kind of the forefront of what your team operates like in game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be a good solution. And I also think they should probably add a tracer player because from what we've seen from Xzi and Sparkle, I think developing naturally good tracer gameplay takes a lot of time, and I think it requires quite a heavy time commitment, which I don't think these guys will have just based on their scrim timings, their practice sessions, and just the entire schedule built around the league. So I think you have to have a natural tracer player rather than try and get one of your other players to adapt to a hero they're not comfortable on, because the competition is quite fierce this year. We've got a pretty stacked lineup of tracer players as well. So if it comes down to a meta where the tracer is expected to carry, Dallas had better brace themselves. I
Definitely, I
Yeah.
think it's not season one where he can. It's not season one Houston Outlaws where he can just put Jake on Tracer and pray that the rest of the team will do fine.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think they could do with a Tracer player, and Tracer is a hero that requires a lot of consistent practice, and you have to get the timing right. You have to have a natural feel for the character.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Compared to someone like McCree or Ash, their skills are quite transferable, whereas Tracer's movement is quite unique to the game. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, uh, Tracer is kind of what was introduced as the concept for Overwatch, and if you listen to what Jeff Kaplan says in his developer blogs, I think that they could definitely use a tracer player, and
Mm-hmm.
also maybe the same tracer player could take off some heat for the hit scan role from Xzi. because if you remember last season, Xzi's health was having issues,
Yeah.
and to avoid a repeat of that, they would probably do well to have someone that can play the same heroes that Xzi does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we both agree on that front. And yeah, any more finishing thoughts before we round off this session?
Um, I just hope the cycle of misery can stop for Dallas. I am 100% confident, but hey, maybe.
Yep, you are in our prayers, Dallas fans.
Yep.
And okay, so if you guys have any questions about this episode, feel free to comment them down below. Do like and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this episode, and join us for the next one. Um, for those of you who don't know, I also write an Overwatch based blog, which I will link in the description. And yeah, we will see you in the next episode. Which one do you want to do next, Nightwing? We haven't actually decided the next one yet, so you can uh, you can pick one.
Um, I think we could probably go with since we've gotten to Dallas, we can probably go with Houston next, just because I think they're doing something very interesting with signing Jake and getting a new GM. I think that's something that would be cool, and we can put the Texas rivals against each other.
Alright, sure. Houston Outlaws it is. So I hope you guys turn on those notifications after you hit the subscribe button, which I trust you guys will do. So yeah, we'll see you soon. And we're signing off for now. Have a good night. Bye bye.
See you.